to walk you through my paper, which concerns the classic textual analysis of Plato's Republic and its connection to fine arts. Excuse my cat there. Okay, so first of all, we need to go through some historical background. Plato was, first of all, from a very influential family. He was related to the lawmaker Solon. Time Plato was growing up, the kind of vestiges of the democracy had become corrupted, and people were starting to ask questions about why they lost the war to Sparta. So Plato was destined to be, one of the creme de la creme of Athenian politics. So he also is very famously, as most of you know, the student of Socrates. As official tutor, he was cutting class and going and listening to Socrates. Okay, so what does Plato say through Socrates about the teaching of fine arts and the role of fine arts? Well, that is one of the things we're going to go into. Basically, he says that nothing that is dishonorable or not truth or just or honor should not be taught to youth. So that equals censorship in my world. So who gets to define what is moral, good, and just? That's basically the gist of my paper. Thank you. This is the portion of my presentation where we're going to talk about the literature review. Okay, so first of all, we need to talk about the huge influence that the book The Republic had on the political and societal development of Western civilization. Plato was basically it through the Middle Ages. The Republic has 10 books. The only books we're going to really discuss in any detail are books 1, 2, and 3. So book 1 basically establishes the setting of the book. It's kind of an all-night dinner conversation. Socrates is clearly the elder and the teacher, but he very famously pushes people to defend what they believe. And in book 1, we get to meet some of the other participants, and they're kind of the youth of Athens, and it includes 2 of Plato's real brothers, plus one individual that represents a school of teaching or philosophy called the Sophists. Now, the Sophists didn't really believe that they had to stick to the truth. As John said in his presentation, Socrates valued being able to argue both sides, but you shouldn't take money for it. And that was the real issue that Plato and Socrates in the book has with the idea that, if you have enough money, you can pay somebody to argue for you. And it's okay, truth per se isn't really important here, but if you can argue both sides, you're slick. And one of the things that establishes, they start to talk about justice. What is justice? And the individual that's in the dinner party that represents the Sophists says, well, it's the mighty that rule. The guy that has the most power, and he might not be the most just guy, but he has all the power, and then he kind of trickles down and makes sure people are safe. Okay, so that's basically book 1. With 2 brings us into kind of our first introduction of why the fine arts have to be controlled. So, especially the dramatists like Aeschylus and Sophocles and Aristophanes, who was very famous for political satire, and then of course the other 2 were tragedy, very famous for their tragedies. And then Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey were the curriculum for young men learning in Greece. So basically what's said in book 2 is that we're going to start with a village. Then it's going to grow into several families. Eventually, we're going to have to diversify our labor. So we're going to have a guardian class, which is made up of potential philosopher kings and auxiliaries. You're going to have farmers and merchants, and then you're going to have this ruling class of the philosopher kings that are older men. So the deal is that Socrates says, because poets have kind of distorted the true nature of God. God is only good and majestic and honorable. If they don't know about dishonorable stuff and they don't know about immorality, then they're not going to promulgate it and pass it down. So it's basically a trickle-down morality that if you don't know. Now, I have a major issue with that, as we're going to talk about. In book 3, we get to an actual division of power. We're no longer saying, oh, it's just because of what you do for a living. Also, interestingly, and before we move on to book 3, Socrates believes that everything that is dishonorable needs to be scrubbed from mythology. So if you took out everything that was immoral, or every time Zeus chased a woman around out of lust, you're taking out a lot of, what is Greek mythology. So Socrates basically argues that if you don't teach it, they won't pass it down, right? I disagree with that, and it's a pretty radical division into of society and control of information, which I'll go into the analysis. But book 3 basically has us setting up this idea that you are going to have to justify why the gold memberships or the gold members have their status. And basically, Socrates says it's okay to tell just one little noble lie, so people won't ask too many questions, and you can justify this. But after that, we're not lying anymore, and we're only teaching truth, honor, and justice. For the analysis portion, we need to talk about if Plato was actually really serious about what he was saying in the Republic. Because if he is, he's talking about a radical control of society. He advocated for families to be broken up and, all the children to be raised communally. As John said in his presentation, all the children, the boys anyway, would be taken away and educated away from their family. But there's also some speculation that Plato was kind of being sarcastic in this, and he was trying to saying, oh yeah, if I could do anything I want, this is what I do. So it depends on how you take Plato out what he was talking about doing in society. So only the true, of course, this would be a radical censorship in a free democratic society. That's a little crazy. And the arts are usually a way for free expression and pushing the bounds of morality and what's accepted in society. And also, arts can be used to glorify and reinforce patriotism and nationalism and the power of the state. So definitely Plato, in my opinion, would be for glorifying the state with artwork and censoring it. Which brings us to the idea that maybe all art, because it's an imitation of an image or an imitation of a thing, is a lie. So one of the things that Socrates says about art and its dangers, and the reason it has to be controlled, is because poets have taken liberties with the truth and they have distorted it. So, all this mythology and all these little, salacious stories about all the gods and, the dishonorable things that went on in the Iliad and the Odyssey, these were all told to attract the baser and more banal elements of human nature. That one was for you, Jill, for real. So the arts have to be controlled. Censorship should be enacted. And once you have this generation after generation of society that don't know anything about injustice or evil or, lies or immorality, they're not going to do it. It's just going to be, and, in an optimistic world, yeah, we could all hope for that. But, Plato's book has also been used to justify the ruling classes and justify the reason that some people had power and some people didn't. So Plato is, as we said, is a huge, huge inspiration. Everything after Plato is just a discussion of Plato. Yeah, I agree. Okay. I that's it. We'll see you for the next slide. First of all, I was very surprised that some of his ideas about separating families and using art and media, what we would call the media, to promulgate and strengthen the state and only teach what is moral and proper to the youth, was very similar to a program that Hitler had called the New Man. The New Man would only be educated in the proper literature and Wagner operas, and he would only look at certain artwork. Other artwork is degenerate or demoralizing, and he would reproduce with another racially appropriate woman. And the Lebensborn program, where they encouraged Nazi men and women to have children, and then they were raised on these in these institutions, and the women gave their babies up, and it's very shades of Plato and the Republic there. Not that I would say that Plato was a full-on fascist, but some of his policies are rather controlling and totalitarian and a bit fascist, just kind of flirting with fascism, right? All right, also I was surprised to learn that Plato's ideas kind of contradicted a lot of the ideas that came out during the Enlightenment that were supposedly revivals of classical ideas. The ideas that are so close and near and dear to our American constitutional freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the idea that you should not censor. There should be freedom of press. But in our history, we have actually censored things. There was the Hays Code that regulated movies and television forever. There was the whole McCarthy era hearings and the Red Scares, where, entertainment figures, artists, were targeted because of their political beliefs, because they were afraid they were going to spread them to red-blooded American people. So we have one narrative in our country that says, oh yeah, we're all about freedom of expression and the right to freedom. But then again, some of our history has shown that we're more than willing to censor and to regulate and redact information that might be considered damaging or demoralizing. Plato would agree with that. He would agree that the Hays Code was appropriate. He would agree that they needed to control what kind of movies were being made. Also, we all know, if we've been in education, that the last 25 years, the first thing to go when hard decisions have to be made, as they say, in educational budgets, that fine arts programs are the first ones that are slashed. There's also been very much a more awareness of, the emotional, mental health of students. Fine arts program, they're the first things on the cutting block, because Americans seem to view them as frivolous, maybe not moral, not upright, pushing the boundaries of what we believe our society. In my view, as an artist, I don't want to be told what I can and cannot paint or depict. As an educator, it is not my job to indoctrinate children. My job is to give them several different perspectives and let them decide what's best for them or what they believe. It's called critical thinking. How can you have critical thinking if they're never taught evil versus good? That's a huge flaw, in my opinion, with Plato. And Plato would absolutely agree with the cuts to fine arts and public education when times are tough. So